On the final day of 1944, the winter sky over northern Germany looked less like a battlefield and more like the end of the world. A formation of B-17 flying fortresses from the 100th Bomb Group struggled to claw its way out of the firestorm above Hamburg. They had survived the flak, somehow, but the darkness ahead held no promise of safety. Inside the cockpit of the Little Skipper, Captain Glenn Rojon wiped a thin frost from the plexiglass canopy, trying to see through the heavy clouds bleeding into smoke from the burning city below. The headwind was so fierce, it felt as if an invisible hand was pushing the aircraft backward. Every mile home had to be fought for. Then the hunters came. Flashes of silver light streaked across the formation. A second later, the snarling engines of Messerschmitt Me-109s ripped through the air. The German fighters dove in staggered waves, opening fire the instant they reached the bombers. For Rojon, the moment froze. He could clearly see the face of a German pilot as the Messerschmitt skimmed past his nose. A cold, focused expression that left no doubt. This was a deadly duel between men, not machines. Tracer rounds slashed through the formation. One B-17 lit up like a torch and spiraled down. To close the widening gap, Rojon shoved the throttles forward, forcing Little Skipper into a new lead position. He didn't know it yet, but that decision would place him at the center of one of the most extraordinary aviation events in history. The impact came without warning. A crushing blow from below slammed through the entire aircraft. Little Skipper lurched violently downward, as if caught by a giant hand. Rojon and co-pilot Bill Leake hauled back on the yoke with everything they had. Even then, the fortress felt unbearably heavy, wrong in a way that made the hair on their necks rise. Then they saw it. Pinned beneath their aircraft was another B-17. 9 lives. The collision had fused the two bombers together. The dorsal turret of 9 lives had slammed into the belly of Little Skipper, while Little Skipper's own ball turret was jammed deep into the spine of the aircraft below. 60,000 pounds of steel and fuel now locked together in mid-air. Fire erupted from one of 9 lives' engines, and streams of burning fuel swept across Little Skipper's left wing. The heat inside the cockpit rose. The smell of gasoline and scorched metal filled the air. Altitude dropped fast, too fast. Inside the lower aircraft, ball turret gunner Edward Woodall crawled desperately out of his disabled turret. When he looked up, he froze. The ball turret of Little Skipper had punched straight through the roof of his bomber. And inside that shattered sphere was Joseph Russo, wedged in place, unable to escape. Crew members from the upper bomber tried to crank the turret to free him, but the metal had fused on impact. Russo began whispering the prayers of a dying man through the intercom, prayers the entire crew could hear, but none could answer. Back in the cockpit, Rojon understood the terrible math. The only way to give anyone a chance of surviving was to hold both bombers steady long enough for the crew to bail out. He cut power to the engines and used whatever airflow remained to coax the monstrous hybrid aircraft into a barely controlled glide. His voice came over the intercom, steady, decisive. Prepare to jump. One by one, men leapt into the freezing air, their parachutes blossoming behind them. 6 escaped successfully. Only Rojon and co-pilot Bill Leake remain. Rojon shouted at Leake to bail out. Leake shook his head. He knew the truth instantly. If he left, the aircraft would roll into a death spiral, trapping Rojon inside with no hope of escape. "I'm staying," Leake said quietly. "We finish this together." 2 men, 1 cockpit, a 30-ton burning machine falling toward Earth. On the ground, German soldiers stopped firing, stunned by the bizarre sight overhead. Their battery captain wrote in his logbook, 2 American fortresses locked together, impossible to fight, awaiting their fall. But the bombers did not fall, not yet. High above a winter field, navigator Robert Washington, already drifting down beneath his parachute, watched in awe as the conjoined aircraft descended, trailing a long plume of black smoke like a wounded leviathan. Inside the cockpit, the ground rushed upward. Rojan and Leake braced their legs against the instrument panel, pulled with every fiber of strength left in their bodies, and hauled the yokes back in a final, desperate effort to soften the impact. 9 lives hit first. It exploded in a massive fireball, launching Little Skipper forward. The surviving bomber skidded across the frozen field, tearing through a wooden shed before finally grinding to a stop. Silence. In the mangled cockpit, surrounded by shattered glass and twisted metal, Rojan and Leake were still seated, alive, barely believing it themselves. As Leake crawled out, he instinctively reached for the cigarette in his jacket pocket. Just as he placed it between his lips, a young German soldier sprinted toward him, snatched the cigarette away, and pointed at the river of gasoline flowing beneath their feet. A strangely human gesture in the middle of a brutal war. That day, 10 men survived from the 2 bombers, a number that defied every rule of physics, chance, and warfare. All were taken prisoner. Glenn Rojan received the Distinguished Flying Cross, but he always said only one thing mattered. Bill Leake saved my life. After the war, life pulled them apart. 4 decades passed. Then, in 1986, Rojan finally found Leake again. 2 old men, speaking through a phone line, listening for the echoes of their younger selves, the men who had once fought death together in the cockpit of a falling B-17. A year later, they met in person for the final time. The last survivor of the piggyback flight, Captain Glenn Rojan, passed away in 2003. But the story he and Leake left behind is one of the rarest in aviation history. A story of fate, courage, and the fragile line that separates life from death in the sky. 2 B-17s fell that day, but their story never touched the ground.